Good evening, everyone. Welcome. My name is Jim Podolsky. Diana is away this week, and so she asked me if I would fill in for her. So I'm sort of a substitute teacher. So you can expect the same that you might from a substitute teacher. Most of the alternate teachers actually started a 3-week retreat yesterday. So I'm going to share with you some of my thoughts and understanding about Buddhist practice. Diana didn't give me a particular subject to talk about. A couple weeks ago, I went to visit a friend of mine who this year was put in a memory care facility. And he's still pretty high functioning, and he was quite displeased with how things were going. And so the head of this place called about 10 of his friends together to talk to him about what his dissatisfaction was and how we might help in a skillful way, in a way that would both benefit him and also not lead to him being harmed. One of the things that he talked about a lot were issues of freedom and autonomy and choice. And it really struck me, like we hear about freedom so much, particularly on a day like today, 9/11. And it took me back to the late 90s when Gil Fronsdal gave a talk on freedom. He said that oftentimes the type of freedom that we talk about in day-to-day environments is what he calls freedom to. So it's freedom to do certain things, freedom to say certain things, freedom to think certain things. And sometimes that goes along with some recognition of responsibility and consequences and non-harming. And sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it's freedom to is some expression of wanting to just follow one's impulses in a way that may or may not be wise or beneficial. What Gil said, and stuck with me all of these years, was that the practices that the Buddha taught were really maybe better characterized as freedom from. So freedom from mind states and actions that might harm oneself or others. And it then made me think a little bit about what brought the Prince Gautama, the Buddha to be, to go out and discover what he discovered. So you may have heard this story. I'll give a very short version of it. But Prince Gautama was living in a palace. His father was a king. And so he was in an environment where he had, the best food, the best clothes, the best entertainment, as much pleasant as could be put together, and as little unpleasant. And that was kept from him as much as possible. And that sort of worked until he got into his later part of his 20s, and he got curious about what was going on outside the palace walls. So he made an arrangement with one of his attendants to sneak out of the palace. I suppose probably got some sort of disguise, and walk out, in the village and see what was it like outside of the palace. One of the first things he came across was a person who was sick. Now, believe it or not, as he was growing up, they were able to keep from his view anybody that was sick. So he had no idea what sickness was like, what disease was like. And it shocked him. He didn't realize that was part of human life. And they continued on, and then they came across somebody that was old. I imagine somebody that was probably sort of bent over, maybe had a cane of some kind. Living in that realm myself right now, I know many of my friends have trouble hearing or seeing, and I'm sure back then there weren't cataract surgeries or hearing aids. So he saw somebody that was old, I suppose probably wrinkly skin, and he again was, just was astounded that this occurred, and his attendant, told him, oh yeah, this is what happens to human beings. And then the third thing that caught his attention was he saw a dead person. He saw, I assume, somebody that was maybe in a funeral procession or being prepared for cremation, and he wanted to know, what is this? Why is that person not moving? And so his attendant told him, well, this is death, and it's inevitable. Everyone is going to die. And then the fourth person that caught his attention was a monastic, somebody in robes, walking, I think it was across a field, in a very serene and peaceful manner. And so he went back to the palace, and this really shocked him. This really, had an incredible effect on him. So much so that he decided he was struck with this question of, is there any way out of this? Is there any way out of sickness, old age, and death? He had to know. He didn't want to believe that was true. And of course, associated with sickness, old age, and death were suffering and pain and grief. And so he made a decision to leave the palace, to leave his wife, his newborn son, his father. I think his mother had passed away before then. And, leave the security and luxury of the palace to go and really seek answers to, is there freedom from sickness, old age, and death? And I suspect because he saw the monastic that he decided to go in that tradition, put on robes and seek teachers. He apparently mastered many forms of meditation. He thought maybe the problem was the body itself, and so he ate like 1 grain of rice a day until his body was emaciated, thinking, okay, well, maybe maybe that's a way to get free of the suffering of having a body. And at some point he decided, no, he wasn't getting any closer to the freedom that he was looking for. And so he started eating again. And then he had, based on his 7 years of practice, he was able to have deep insights that led him to be, one evening, to become totally awake, totally free from these concerns that he had. Kind of saw that there was that there was some clinging that led to the suffering. So, to me, that was quite inspiring. Somebody that would just drop everything. I suppose in this day and age, it would be like quitting a good job, giving all your money to charity, and just, wandering around, looking for teachers, looking for spiritual teachers. On Saturday, there was a monk here, Tan Jeff, who gave a talk about the Four Noble Truths. And one of the things he said towards the end of the day was that one should cultivate desire for the path, cultivate desire for the goal. And so I wondered how does one cultivate desire to be free to the degree that the Buddha did? And so I asked Han Jeff, how did you cultivate the desire that led you from going from being potentially a college professor to a monk? And he gave a very, very brief answer. He didn't go into his life story, but it was basically from suffering. He had a roommate in college who had taken his own life, and had some intense psychological experience that made him decide to become a monk. So that's something that I ask myself about, like how do I develop a sense of desire for walking the path? I don't think that it's just through willpower or through the ego. It's helpful to have friends that are on the path, Sangha, places like this, Kalyanamitta groups. The other thing that I've learned over the years, at least from Gil, was that you don't have to imagine that the fruits of this practice are something that's going to happen a long time from now. Like it took the Buddha 7 years of just, practicing nonstop, doing nothing else. It might take that to get the full realization that the Buddha had. I don't know. I'm not there. But there's also some freedom that you can experience moment to moment. You don't have to be fully enlightened to have some benefit from this practice, some freedom. And that leads me to, sort of the question of, well, what is it that you want to be free of or free from? And so one of the lists of things that I'll say it's considered valuable to be free of, but I think in practice I've found that it's valuable to be free of, are what's known as the hindrances. And there's a book that I just happen to have here called Unhindered by Gil Fronsdal that explains in greater detail what these are and how to work with them. So I'm going to give maybe sort of a synopsis of this. The hindrances are mental activities that tend to cover over what's going on. So sometimes I think of the hindrances as my unskillful helpers. You know, they want to protect me from seeing something that I don't want to see. Maybe that's useful in the short term, but in the long term, that isn't helpful. So the first of the hindrances is sensual desire. You know, desire to have certain sense experiences. Now, there's nothing wrong with having sense experiences. The problem comes when they take over, when we lose awareness and become, I'll say in a certain way, captivated by them. So I suppose a simple sensual desire is, I know that I have a box of chocolate-covered ice cream bars at home. And when this talk is over, I'll go home and I'll have one. And it'll be enjoyable, I'm sure. If I were to go home and eat the whole box, that may not be so skillful. The analogy that's often used for sensual desire is like a pond that has dye in it. So you can imagine like a swimming pool that somebody poured dye in it. It would be hard to see accurately what's in there, that the colors wouldn't be correct and it might be kind of dark. So I suspect you've all had some experience of being captivated by sensual desire at some point. You know, whether it's for ice cream or food or thrill rides. And so how do we get, when we're caught by something like sense desire, how can we get free of it? How can we become free from it? And the suggestion, again in this book, is to first be mindful of it. So mindfulness is a really important tool for freedom, in that although we often cultivate mindfulness on something simple like the breath or the walking, it's helpful to be mindful of what's going on in our mind. So paying attention to, is there sensual desire that's acting right now in my mind? And then to bring some examination to it. You know, what happened that this arose? What were the conditions that came together? Is there something underneath it? Are there some emotions or some thoughts? Did something just happen that we might not want to see? And so examining it. And that doesn't mean just thinking about it over and over again, but really feeling what that's like in the body. Allowing it in a certain way, not making it the enemy, not making it something that we have to fight against, but really kind of getting to know it. And in that recognizing of it with mindfulness, in that examining of it, we may find that over time it lessens. It might just lessen on its own. Like at some point you might just find that it's, you just like, wow, what was that? You may also want to do something about it. So there are some antidotes for these mind states. One of them for a sense desire is often seeing the downside of it. Like one of the practices that the Buddha taught for when you become obsessed with a body, either yours or someone else's, you can do this practice where you imagine the body being taken apart. And so like all of the different organs and pieces are like laid out on the floor in front of you. It's called the 32 parts of the body. And you can look at them and you think, are any of these desirable? What? And that's kind of an extreme practice. Well, it's certainly a practice that I've been aware of for some time, and it is practiced on retreats. But there's other practices that one can do to consciously lessen that sense desire. Somebody told me that when they practiced in Thailand, they were in a monastery, and there was a skeleton hanging in the back of the hall, and there was a sign on it that said, "This is the skeleton of Miss Thailand 1932. So when you look at that skeleton, there isn't, any kind of attraction to it that, Miss Thailand 1932 might have evoked. So there's being aware of the hindrance, examining it, lessening it, and then at some point letting it go. It may let go on its own, or you may just decide to substitute some other thoughts or practices. And then finally, appreciating the absence of that hindrance. Like noticing when that hindrance isn't operating. It's like, oh, yeah, right now I'm pretty content, pretty happy. And so by appreciating the absence of it, it may make it easier the next time it arises to see that it isn't something that you really want to foster. So that was the first of the 5 hindrances, is sensual desire. The next one is ill will. And the image for that, I think the metaphor for it is like a boiling water. So when water is boiling, if you try to look into it, all you see are the bubbles. You can't really see clearly or accurately. And again, with ill will, first of all, developing what I call a certain vigilance for when ill will is operating in the mind. This one, I think what I've noticed these days is that ill will seems to sell newspapers, right? Getting people angry, getting people upset. So it takes a little bit more active practice, I think, to just notice how often triggers for ill will or aversion arise. And you can then do the same process as for sensual desire. You can, first of all, recognize it, see what it, kind of feel it in the body. Notice what it's like. Examine it. What were there triggers for it? Were there thoughts? Were there emotions? Were there activities that triggered it? Is there a way to lessen it? One of the things for ill will, one thing that can lessen ill will is doing an active practice like loving kindness practice. I do that as sort of like taking my medicine before I get out of bed in the morning. I always do a period of loving kindness before getting out of bed, just as an antidote for probably what I will encounter that day. Letting go of it, that's, I think if you really feel what anger is like, you may find, well, this actually isn't very pleasant. This is not a place that I want to hang out in. And then appreciating its absence. So noticing, like throughout the day, just asking yourself, well, is there ill will operating? Do I, there's many, many forms of this, all the way from just raging violence to just mild annoyance. So it isn't like it's just one size fits all. The next hindrance is actually described as a pair of hindrances, sloth and torpor. Now those are kind of old-timey words that we don't use or I don't use in my day-to-day interactions with people, but they point to sort of low energy. One of them is low energy in the body, and one is low energy in the mind. And this pair, it's often described as a single hindrance. I think that's one of the ones that's the hardest for me. It's hard to be mindful when you don't have much energy. If you don't have much energy, you don't have much curiosity, much incentive. So it takes some desire to get curious about it and investigate sloth and torpor. Those are often described as like an algae-filled pond. Again, so allowing it, really recognizing that it's there, then doing some examination, and then lessening it. So for me, one of the skillful ways of lessening sloth and torpor is to get up from sitting in front of my computer and going for a walk, or just doing something, getting some movement going. Another way, which is probably just sort of so-so, is iced tea and dark chocolate. Those tend to bring a certain energy to the body that in the monastic tradition, I forgot about that. Yeah, in the monastic tradition, they don't eat food after the midday meal. But chocolate is considered medicine, so they can have that at any time. So On Saturday, at the end of the day, I gave Ton Jeff 2 bars of dark chocolate because I knew that was something he could accept after the midday meal, and I happen to know that he likes it. And then letting go of that. Sometimes I find by just starting to do something, the energy will return, and it's kind of like I get out of that being stuck. And then appreciating the time when sloth and torpor aren't operating. I tend to be a night person, so this time of the day, I don't feel any sloth and torpor. When I wake up in the morning, it's a different case, but appreciating, like, oh yeah, it's actually enjoyable to be appropriately energized. Another hindrance that's often given as a pair is restlessness and worry. So just like sloth and torpor are low energy in the body and the mind, restlessness and worry are sort of agitated energy in the body and in the mind. And again, you can do the same thing. Recognize when those are present. Examine what thoughts, what emotions, what actions preceded that. What does it feel like? I suspect it's mostly unpleasant, but you may actually find agitation pleasant. Lessening that. Sometimes when I'm feeling restless, it's because there's so many things that I'm trying to do simultaneously. And so sometimes just starting doing one thing will bring a little bit more focus and reduce the restlessness and agitation. And then appreciating when those restlessness and agitation aren't operating. And then the final hindrance is doubt. And that's sometimes described as a mud-filled pond. And doubt is also I think it's considered one of the hardest hindrances to work with, because it's one of the descriptions of it is like you just don't know what to do, like you're unsure of what you should do next, or is this practice going to really work, or should I be doing some other practice? Maybe I should be doing Sufi dancing instead of this mindfulness. So examining doubt can be challenging. It's like you look at it and you go, well, is this doubt or isn't it? What should I, is there a way for me to lessen it? This has been something that has been a part of my experience all my life. When I was in graduate school, I got married, and I was married for about 10 years. And one of the things that I liked about my wife is she never had any doubt. She was always absolutely sure of herself. I didn't always think that she was right. And there were times when it was annoying. But whenever I was in a place of uncertainty, I always thought I could look to her for certain, like, well, what should we do? And she had very refined tastes and tell me what's tacky and what's not tacky. But that strategy really didn't work. If you try to rely on another person to get you out of uncertainty, it develops, it doesn't work, at least in my experience. So sometimes I think you just have to make a decision and just, decide, okay, I'm going to do this. And then stick with it for a while and see what happens. And then when doubt isn't present, appreciating it. Again, that sense of like, oh, yeah, I know exactly what I'm going to do after this talk. I'm going to go home and have my ice cream bar. There's no doubt about that. So that's one of the lists of things that one can, I believe, you can develop some freedom from here and now. It doesn't take 7 years of aesthetic practice or something to reach some final and irreversible freedom. That there is freedom available in this practice, moment to moment, that you can access by paying attention, by bringing some curiosity, some investigation to checking it out, feeling what's it like, what's it like both when that hindrance is operating and when it's not. And so in the short term, there's freedom, and then in the longer term, you may find that the hindrances don't arise as much. I don't know of anyone who claims that the hindrances never arise for them anymore. But I think how you relate to them can change over time as you do this practice. Yeah. So freedom from, I think, is something that's something that we can aspire to and practice day to day. So, and again, I'll give one more plug for Gil's book on Unhindered. If you look at it, you can see that I obviously haven't read it multiple times, but I have read enough of it to remind me of what I've learned from Dharma talks and other sources over the years. So, thank you all. And we do have some time for questions if anyone wants to ask. Sally will give you the microphone. Yeah, Michael.
Thank you. I get two things. Usually I'm pretty hard on myself when I'm meditating, and then I heard a dog barking a little while ago, and if anyone else heard it, but I was thinking, oh, that's funny and silly, and I kind of enjoyed it. I was like, oh, the kindfulness and loving kindness is working. And then when you were talking about doubt, I was thinking it struck kind of a tone with me. I think maybe today's generation or just today's society, we're sort of bombarded by choices, kind of a paralysis by analysis. Should I do this type of meditation or that type of meditation? Which one of the 10? And sometimes it's just hard to pick one or the other and whatnot, but thanks for the talk.
Oh, you're welcome. Yeah, we really do have a lot of choices, and for me, part of it is consciously not making choices. Like somebody says, well, A or B, and I go, well, I'll get back to you. At least some choices I decide judiciously which choices to make. But thank you for your comment.
Thank you for your talk tonight. Sorry I was late. And just like listening to the hindrances, the one on doubt also, I just kept thinking it's kind of another form of unwillingness in some ways. It could be. I mean, making a decision or not. I think like I can think about like what I'm not willing to do, and usually it's because of there's something underlying. And for me, sometimes it's fear, or it might be I know it better, or I'm doubting someone telling me something. Those are the things that they're so familiar that I can catch myself and then just go for it. Because you can ask your question, like you could ask yourself, what's the worst thing that would happen? If I did make a decision, it just, I think sometimes I think like making decisions eliminates all those other possibilities, but you just have to take a leap. And yeah, I think out of everything you talked about, I started really thinking about doubt and how it is for me, but.
Yeah. Good. Yeah, that's as I said, it's considered one of the hardest hindrances to work with. I find that I often, well, I shouldn't say often. Some of the time, I feign confusion to get out of doing something. so I don't know if that's even faux doubt or something, but yeah, it's.
Thank you for the talk. So one very light-hearted question: can you have like coffee instead of iced tea for low energy?
Yes. It's interesting. When I first started going on meditation retreats, they would purposely not offer coffee. They would not make it. You could bring your own and you could have those little pour-overs and that, but they wouldn't offer it, I guess because if you drink more than a certain amount, it kind of causes agitation in the mind. More recently, I found at the Insight Retreat Center, they make coffee every morning. There was enough people that wanted it. So it's kind of, it's kind of changed. Personally, for me, tea doesn't make me as jittery as coffee. So that's kind of a personal experience, but yeah. Is that something that you like doing, drinking coffee?
Yeah, I think like if I go on a retreat and don't have coffee, then I just like sleep off during the meditation. I think like there is some sweet spot, like you said, in moderation. Then I'm able to like be one pointed. But if I drink like too much, then anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So. Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, well, we're just about at 9 o'clock. So thank you all for